Good morning, Team TSTA. I love it. First, I want to truly thank you for being here. Thank each and every one of you for being in Frisco alongside with your fellow sister, union brothers and sisters. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the work that you do every single day for the amazing children of the state of Texas. See, a year ago, many of us were here at the HoD when we were in San Marcos, when I talked about how we all needed to vote education first. I said that if we united and truly made public education a priority in every election, that we could become the change agents in our communities. Well, you answered the call. We mobilized, we organized, and marched to the polls and voted education first, and change started coming to us. We elected and flipped 12 House seats to elect 12 pro-public education candidates to the Texas House. We also unseated 2 of the worst education members of the state Senate. You did that. And we sent a strong message to Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Even though Abbott and Patrick were reelected with smaller margins than they anticipated, look what happened. Instead of promoting voucher bills or bathroom bills on the first day of session, they joined with Dennis Bonnet, the new Speaker of the House, to declare school finance as the session's #1 priority. And to everyone's surprise, on Inauguration Day, Dan Patrick endorsed a $5,000 across-the-board pay raise for teachers. Now, this sounds like the tone and priorities at the state capitol are changing. And this shift started because of us. But where is it headed? What will the results be when the legislature adjourns on Memorial Day 4 weeks from now? The answer is still up to us. Because our work, we know, it's like grading papers. It never ends. But I doubt most of you have heard of Gideon J Tucker. He was a 19th century writer and politician in New York. But you may recognize one of the more quotable quotes when he said, "No one's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session." And we know that and live that every 2 years in the state of Texas. But Mr. Tucker would have known this because among many of his pursuits, he was a member of the New York State Assembly. So my point is this: don't start celebrating that extra money for your classroom until you see your school district's next budget. And don't start spending that pay raise until the legislature finishes paying for one. Don't take anything involving this Texas legislature for granted. Yes, state leaders have put $6.3 billion on the table for increased funding to public education over the next 2-year budget cycle. That is more than $3 billion a year. But the legislative session, it's not over. Public school funding, including pay raises, are still being negotiated by the House Senate Conference Committee. And even as legislators talk about increasing state education funding, many of them are still trying to ram through property tax cuts that will mean little in the way of real savings to the average homeowner, but could prolong the budgetary difficulties of many school districts, potentially offsetting any funding increases. So political promises aren't worth anything unless and until politicians deliver on those promises. We could yet be hit with an unpleasant surprise if we don't stay focused on our priorities and demand that our lawmakers do the same. What kind of school finance reform and what kind of pay raises educators will actually receive from the state will be determined by how engaged we remain with our elected lawmakers during the rest of this session. And let me be clear, we have to make sure that we deliver our message clearly and often. We must be clear about pay raises, because every single employee in the state of Texas, every teacher, every librarian, every counselor, every nurse, every school bus driver, cafeteria worker, and every other support staff has earned and must receive a significant pay raise this session. Now, Team TSTA, we will continue delivering that message to the legislature and the governor. But we're not just going to repeat that message. We're going to be loud and we're going to be clear. Because Team TSTA will also continue our fight against what the self-styled education reformers like to call merit pay, incentive pay, performance pay, or whatever catchy phrase they come up with at the moment to try and pull a wool over your eyes. But we know better. It is a bad idea that is not getting any better with age, but it refuses to die on its own. The Senate, they put a merit pay provision in its pay raise bill. The House, they removed the merit provision from its bill after we opposed it. And that was much to the dismay of the so-called education reformers, who aren't educators and haven't been inside a classroom probably since they were in high school. This is another issue that will be decided in conference committee before the session ends. And another message that we must continue to deliver loudly and clearly to all our legislators. One of the most well-heeled advocates around the Capitol for school privatization and merit pay, that is singling out a few teachers for higher pay to the exclusion of everyone else, is the Texas Public Policy Foundation, TPPF for short. Several weeks ago, the media asked TPPF's senior advisor what she thought about across-the-board pay raises for teachers. And the advisor replied, and I quote, "Across-the-board pay raises for teachers are wasteful." You heard that right. She said, across-the-board pay raises for teachers are wasteful. I heard that and I said, wasteful? This individual needs to sit down and actually listen to some real educators, or better yet, spend a day in the classroom with any one of you, or the thousands of teachers who are pouring their heart, their soul, and pedagogy right into our students and into their classrooms. We could start with Virginia Caldwell, a middle school teacher and TSTA member in HoD. Virginia testified before the Senate committee this year about how she makes more money in one day as an Uber driver on the weekend than she makes in one day as an ESL teacher in HoD ISD. And that's despite having 8 years of teaching experience and a master's degree. I can't begin to imagine to express how wrong that is. So Virginia, she won't be wasting a pay raise, and she shouldn't be forced to compete on a bogus game with her already underpaid colleagues and jump through some so-called data-driven hoops, such as STAR test scores to get one. TPPF should also have a chat with Thaisa Velasquez, a bilingual teacher in Harlandale ISD in San Antonio. Aisa had to drop her health insurance coverage for her family because on her teacher's salary, she could no longer afford her ever-increasing premiums and deductibles. Aisa, she won't be wasting a pay raise either. And neither will any of you or the 40% of Texas teachers who are paid so poorly in this state that they have to take an extra job to make ends meet. Any of you, all of you, deserve that pay raise, and neither one of you or any other school employee in the state of Texas will be wasting a pay raise because you are worth more to the life and development of a child than anyone can ever compensate you for. When the average teacher pay in Texas is more than $77,000 below the national average, and support staff are paid even more poorly in the state, no one is going to be wasting a pay raise. And no one should be required to earn raises they've already earned many times over to amuse some school reformers. Those school reformers have no clue about how to measure the real effectiveness of Texas educators. These so-called reformers say that every Texas child deserves an effective teacher. And guess what? Texas has over 300,000 effective teachers every single day. And hundreds of you are sitting in this room right now. But unfortunately, thousands of us are leaving the classroom each and every year because they can no longer afford to teach or work in our public schools. You don't solve that crisis by singling out a handful of teachers for higher pay based on standardized test scores. That's just wrong and reckless.
Amen.
And we all know that teachers can't do what we do without the amazing support of thousands of bus drivers, cafeteria workers, campus security officers, and other crucial support staff. They too have earned pay raises many times over because of their dedicated contributions to the safety and well-being of Texas's 5.4 million school children. The children that we call our kids. See, if groups like TPPF want to talk about wasteful, let's have a conversation about how wasteful the STAR test really is. It wastes millions of tax dollars every single year while cheating teachers and students of invaluable teaching and learning time. That's time that will forever be lost. And any legitimate education expert will tell you that standardized testing is an unfair and ineffective way to rate a teacher's work and students' progress. If the self-styled reformers really want to help reform public education in Texas, they should join us in demanding that the legislature junk the STAR testing regime and the treacherous A through F school grading system that goes along with it. See, although we know that TPPF and other reformers aren't interested really in reforming public education, their goal is to continue undermining them with the phony accountability systems and then privatizing them. I already mentioned Aisa Velasquez, our member in Harlandale, who dropped her health care insurance because her family could no longer afford it. But she may not be the only one, because rising health care costs in this state have been chipping and slashing away educators' take-home pay for years. And the legislature has done absolutely nothing about it. See, the state pays $75 a month towards your health care. How much do you pay? I hear you. You pay a lot more than $75 a month. And it's been going up every single year and will continue to go up next year. But the legislature hasn't increased that $75 a month contribution in 17 years, which adjusted for inflation is only worth about $53 in today's economy. The state budget conferees could do something about it before they complete their work. But they won't, unless we continue to organize, we continue to mobilize, and make our education voices heard. See, the legislature also needs to shore up the retired educators' health care plan and stabilize the TRS pension fund, so retirees can get a long overdue cost of living adjustment and maybe a 13th check. See, this is another budget-related issue that the legislature needs to address before they go home next month. So we must mollify our educator voice to make sure that they do, because there are two competing bills to provide the millions of dollars necessary to make the pension sound actuarially sound. One is Senate Bill 12 by Senator Joan Huffman, which would increase contributions from the state, school district, and educators. The other is House Bill 9 by Representative Greg Bonnet. That's Speaker Dennis Bonnet's cousin, which would require the state to pick up the entire cost out of the rainy day fund, which we supported and actually passed the House on Wednesday. See, the comptroller has projected the rainy day fund will soon have a record balance of $15 billion. You heard that right? $15 billion. That's B, that's a big Texas-sized B right there.
Seriously?
See, the rainy day fund is a state saving account, which is supposed to be reserved for emergencies. And education funding in Texas is an emergency, including retirement benefits, including retirement benefits, and we must make sure that the legislature continue to fund, because this is the emergency that it is. So remember, most retired educators in Texas, they don't get Social Security. So their TRS pension is the only nest egg they have. They've devoted their working years to securing our future in Texas. And we need to keep demanding that the legislature do more to secure their retirement. See, something that has been notably missing from this year's legislative session is a voucher fight. A few voucher bills have been filed, but for the first time in a long time, there hasn't been a major push to siphon tax dollars from public schools for private school tuition. Even Dan Patrick has been silent on what he used to deem as his #1 priority. This is another result of the success that we had in last year's elections. And I'm happy to see the attention focused on educator pay and not vouchers. But don't get too comfortable. School privatization in Texas is not dead. It has simply hopped onto another train, the Charter School Express. And that train is picking up speed. Even though research has shown the catastrophic derailment already happening and looming ahead, impacting thousands of children across the country and in this state, in their communities. Just in 2017 alone, charters received more than $2 billion in Texas state revenue. And much of that tax money went to corporate-style charters headquartered in other states, with little or no accountability to the parents whose children are enrolled in those schools. See, these charters are aggressively expanding in Texas. They may be organized as nonprofits, but many are operated with our tax dollars by for-profit management companies. And hardly a month goes by that we don't hear or read about a charter closure or a charter scandal somewhere in the state or across the nation. Just a few weeks ago, the superintendent of a Houston area charter school and another school employee were indicted on embezzlement charges. They were accused of siphoning more than $250,000 from the school for personal uses, including to buy an expensive SUV and a condo. Remember, every tax dollar that a charter receives or a superintendent steals is a precious tax dollar that is taken away from an already underfunded neighborhood public school. In addition, charters aren't required to provide all the necessary services that every student needs and deserves, including special education, ESL, or bus transportation, or meet all the minimum standards that our neighborhood schools have to abide by. And despite a lingering misconception that's primarily promoted by charter advocates, charters don't perform as well overall as traditional public schools. And according to TEA, and the data that we received in 2012 to 2017, charters in Texas had an overall dropout rate 3 times that of our neighborhood public schools and an overall per performance record than we had. Yet, we have a state education commissioner in the state of Texas who seems to spend more time promoting charters than regulating them. You can boo.
It's not acceptable.
But we also have a state law that encourages districts to turn over struggling campuses to charters so they can receive more state dollars and reprieves from state accountability sanctions. The most extreme case is in San Antonio ISD, whose superintendent and school board are eager to turn over campuses to charter and nonprofits with little to no regard for the concerns and parents and faculty at the affected campuses. See, in doing so, they've been violating state laws that require community involvement and protections of educational standards in campus conversions. And the commissioner, he's letting them get away with it. TSTA is supporting current efforts at the Capitol to halt or slow down charter expansion. And we're seeking more transparency and community input into the charter expansion process. But we must continue to wage the charter fight on two fronts. Not only at the state capitol, but also in your school board meetings throughout the state. See, we must remain heavily involved with school boards on a multitude of issues that are critically important to us and our students. Which brings in merit pay. Many districts, including Dallas ISD, are already experimenting with merit pay plans. Plans that are driving off experienced and effective teachers, disrupting the learning opportunities for untold numbers of children. Another is District of Innovation. Some districts are using that option to hire non-certified teachers or take other cost-cutting steps in direct violation of the DOI law. Cuts that are more than about tax dollars. They're more about tax dollars than what's right for kids. See, a District of Innovation is supposed to be used to improve learning opportunities for school children, period. But what they're doing is cutting corners on educational quality in order to save money. See, the San Antonio Alliance is heavily involved in that fight against the district's negligent and ill-conceived campaign to turn over huge numbers of its students and educators over to charter operators. Charter chains are also aggressively trying to move into El Paso ISD, and the El Paso Teachers Association there is fighting back with the locals elsewhere in the state of Texas. It's inconceivable that our elected school boards are accepting such sustained mediocrity from their superintendents. What about calling them out for being underperforming instead of blaming teachers, ESPs, and kids?
Amen.
What about the school boards bailing out an incompetent superintendent with a bad charter school, which is ineffective and hurts our kids? Because it is time that we take back our public schools. See, local pay raises, working conditions, and any number of other issues that also demand our attention at the local level. Winning victories for our members on these issues begins with how well we engage, how well we organize and mobilize our communities around school board elections, but also how successfully we drive our issues once we elect our endorsed candidates. Board elections in many districts are happening right now, including in San Antonio, Dallas, and El Paso ISD. They're upon us, and our locals are engaged. You already heard that early voting started, and election day is on May 4th. And I am urging each and every one of you who have school board races happening right now to ensure that you're engaged with your members, to vote for our endorsed candidates, and bring their colleagues, friends, and family to the polls. Just like the decisions being made at the state capitol, these elections are crucial to our professions, our students, and the future of public education in your community and across the state. And those of you who have school board elections in November, you need to begin preparing now to recruit and endorse qualified pro-public education candidates. And then get everyone to go out and vote education first for our endorsed candidates. You organized to vote education first in the legislative races last year. But now, it's time to vote education first in your school board races as well. Now I want to share a little bit about what that means. It means finding, supporting, and holding accountable the candidates who will become school board members. See, school board members who will truly serve as our partners in the meaningful work of education. During election time, every politician says that they support kids and teachers. But actions speak louder than words. Our students deserve elected leaders to support kids and all the professionals who work with kids every single day. See, we need elected leaders to be pro-labor in order for our students to be successful, for our working conditions to improve. See, elected leaders just can't say they're for kids if they're not equally for the adults who work with kids every single day. And I pointed out to you in my HoD address to you last year that if we as educators don't organize and vote in the best interest of our profession and our students, if we as educators don't vote education first, then who will? Because as long as politicians are involved in education, we as educators should always be involved in politics. See, this applies to school board races as well as races for state and national office. Of equal importance is if educators don't organize and mobilize to lobby with their school board members and legislators for what is best for our profession and our students, and if we educators don't advocate for education first, then who will? And I'm telling you, when educators advocate school boards successfully, extraordinarily things happen. Things like our local in Del Valley. The Del Valley Education Association has been fighting for and winning the living wage campaign in their community. A campaign that is now the model for the state, which is a sustained 3-year organizing campaign that successfully won starting pay for bus drivers that will now be $16 an hour. And starting pay for all other ESPs will now be $15 an hour. See, Del Valley showed up for 3 years to every school board meeting in their Red for Ed shirts, and they won. See, but the victory wasn't just a policy change. It is a quality of life change for the hundreds of families in the Del Valley Independent School District. See, elections are crucial. But as I pointed out earlier, they're just the beginning. Because as educators, we work in a political world. Whether it's Congress, the State House, or local school board rooms, we are constantly being challenged by politicians and self-styled reformers who want to cut education funding, over-test our children, and privatize our neighborhood public schools. See, last year we as educators were catalysts for change on election day. And now we must continue our work to be catalysts for change at the state capitol and in our local school districts. The stakes, they're too high for our profession and our students to relax and let up now. See, the choices are very clear, and you know what they are. Because we're not just any old Americans, we're Texans. And just like the Tejanos 184 years ago, we'll proudly point to our great public schools and we'll stand in solidarity and we'll tell them, come and take it. Because these are our schools. They will fight to divide us when the so-called school reformers try to continue and push self-styled reforms like test and punish policies. They will hear us say, because whose schools? That's why when legislators and school boards or superintendents try giving away our public schools to for-profit charter operators, they will hear us say, what? Whose schools? Our schools! When school reformers try and take away your professional work with so-called merit pay, They will hear us say, whose school? Our school. That's right. Educators will have the most influence with policymakers, but only if we keep the heat on lawmakers during the remainder of the legislative session. And we must continue to vote education first during this school board's elections and every election hereafter. Because we are Team TSTA. We are standing together. We're taking a stand for our children, regardless of zip code, ability, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or documented status. We are educators. We are nation builders. We are the cornerstone of democracy. And together, we will demand the public schools that our students deserve. Thank you.